He thought no one would notice. After all, who pays attention to the cleaner, the one who empties trash bins and scrubs the marble floors? But what the millionaire never expected was to walk into his office late at night and find the black. Cleaner hunched over a stack of books, studying in the dark with nothing but determination in his eyes. At first, the laughter came easy. What could he possibly achieve? The millionaire scoffed. But that laugh wouldn't last long, because what the cleaner revealed next would leave everyone in the room completely stunned. The city never really slept. The skyscrapers sparkled against the velvet of night, their windows glowing with the promises of wealth, ambition, and dreams fulfilled. In one of those towers, a towering glass monument owned by one of the region's wealthiest businessmen, there was a man most people never even saw. He didn't have a corner office. He didn't sit at mahogany desks or sign papers worth millions. His work began after everyone else had left. His name was Daniel. Daniel was a cleaner. Every evening, he slipped into the building in his faded uniform, bucket and mop in hand, and quietly erased the traces of the powerful people who stormed through the offices by day. Coffee stains, paper crumples, dust from shoes polished to a shine. He moved from floor to floor, often ignored by the security guards who barely looked at him, and invisible to the executives who thought themselves far above his world. But Daniel's story wasn't as ordinary as his job suggested. He came from a background most would have dismissed without a thought. His mother had raised him single-handedly after his father abandoned them when he was still a child. She worked as a cleaner, too. Her hands cracked from chemicals, her back bent from hours spent scrubbing other people's messes. To Daniel, she was the strongest woman alive. She had whispered to him every night, "This is not the life you are destined for. You are meant for something greater. Knowledge will carry you further than money ever could." Those words became his fire. But life had not been kind. Money was always scarce. School fees were a constant struggle. Books were a luxury. And yet, Daniel refused to let circumstance define him. Every penny he earned as a cleaner, he divided carefully. Some for rent, some to support his mother, and the rest to buy used books. While other young men his age spent their evenings laughing in bars or scrolling endlessly on their phones, Daniel spent his nights surrounded by borrowed knowledge. The office he worked in, the skyscraper of the millionaire, was ironically the perfect classroom. When his shift was quiet and no one was around, Daniel would sneak into the conference rooms. He would spread his books across the polished tables, and under the soft glow of desk lamps or sometimes even just the emergency lights, he studied, not just casually, not just for survival, but with hunger. Languages fascinated him most, words that belonged to worlds far away from his own. Spanish, French, Arabic, Mandarin, Russian. Each page he turned felt like unlocking a new universe. He realized quickly he had a gift, not just for memorizing, but for mastering. He could switch between languages seamlessly, thinking in one and answering in another. What started as curiosity became his obsession. To Daniel, every new word was proof that the world was bigger than the label society stuck on him. Cleaner. But not everyone saw it that way. Most of the executives barely noticed him. Those who did treated him as part of the furniture. And the millionaire who owned the building, the man whose name was etched in gold in the lobby, was known for his arrogance. To him, cleaners were background noise, invisible laborers who should be grateful for scraps. His empire was built on deals worth millions, and he surrounded himself with people who reinforced his sense of superiority. Daniel knew this. That's why he always kept his books hidden whenever footsteps echoed down the hallways. He didn't want questions, sneers, or worse, ridicule. But despite his caution, the truth was that he couldn't always stay invisible. There were nights when exhaustion forced him to rest his head against the table for a few seconds. Nights when his whispering practice of French verbs or Arabic phrases echoed faintly in the glass halls. Nights when the security guards shook their heads with a smirk, wondering why a cleaner wasted time on useless things. Still, Daniel pushed forward. The world around him thought of him as nothing more than a man with a mop. But inside, he carried the spirit of someone who refused to surrender. His life outside of the skyscraper wasn't any easier. His apartment was small, barely large enough for his mattress, a rickety table, and the stacks of books he'd collected from second-hand shops. His mother, older now, still worked part-time despite her aching joints. He had promised her that one day she wouldn't have to. One day, her sacrifices would be worth it. But how do you explain dreams in a world that only values titles and money? Daniel's co-workers didn't understand him either. To them, he was strange. "Why bother?" they would ask when they saw him flipping through flashcards on his breaks. "It's not like anyone's going to hire a cleaner to be an interpreter or a professor." Daniel never answered. He had learned long ago that dreams are fragile things. You don't expose them to people who only want to stomp on them. And so his secret world continued. By day, he was a shadow in the glittering building. By night, he was a student, a dreamer, a man preparing for a future no one else could imagine. But fate has a way of revealing what's hidden. It all began on a night like any other. The building was empty, the offices silent. Daniel was on the top floor, the Millionaire's private level. He had finished polishing the floors earlier than usual, and the quiet tempted him. He placed his books carefully on the conference table, pulling out a notebook filled with his own scribbled translations. Tonight he was practicing Mandarin characters. His pen scratched across the page, his lips whispering the tones in perfect rhythm. He was so absorbed that he didn't notice the elevator doors sliding open. The Millionaire had returned unexpectedly. He walked into his office, coat draped over, his arm, phone pressed to his ear, his voice booming with irritation. But when his eyes landed on Daniel, this cleaner, sitting at his table, surrounded by books, muttering in a language he didn't understand, he froze, for a split second, confusion, then amusement, and finally, contempt. To him, it was the most absurd sight. A cleaner, pretending to be something he could never be. A man in a faded uniform scribbling strange words as if the sound of them mattered. The Millionaire let out a low laugh, the kind of laugh meant to humiliate. Studying in the dark, are you? He mocked. Daniel looked up, startled, his pen still in his hand. His heart raced. The moment he had always feared, the moment someone saw him, was here. But he had no idea that this encounter, this accidental discovery, would change everything. The mansion at night was always quiet, save for the faint hum of the security system and the distant ticking of the antique grandfather clock in the hallway. Daniel had grown accustomed to this silence. It was the backdrop to his long nights of studying. By day, he was the quiet, invisible cleaner in Mr. Al-Rahman's palatial home. By night, when his shift was over, he sat in the dim light of a flickering bulb in the staff quarters, poring over borrowed textbooks and scribbled notes. He had no desk, no lamp bright enough to chase away the shadows, but he had determination. His mother's words still echoed in his mind. Education is the one thing no one can take from you. That mantra kept him turning pages when his hands ached from scrubbing floors and polishing marble. It gave him strength when his back was sore from carrying out the trash. For weeks, he believed he was unnoticed. To Mr. Al-Rahman, the billionaire who owned half the luxury real estate in the city, Daniel and his mother were just part of the household staff, a pair of shadows blending into the background. But in truth, the Millionaire had begun to noticing the faint glow under the cleaner's door late at night, noticing the tiredness in Daniel's eyes each morning, and more than once, catching sight of the boy scribbling notes with intensity far beyond what any cleaner's son should have. One particular evening marked the turning point. The discovery Daniel sat hunched over his book, glasses slipping down, his nose, the dull yellow light barely illuminating the page. His notebook was filled with equations, definitions, and diagrams, traces of an education he was piecing together one late night at a time. He was so absorbed that he didn't hear the heavy footsteps until the door creaked open. "Still awake?" Voice cut through the silence like a blade. Daniel's heart stopped. He looked up to see Mr. Al-Rahman leaning against the doorframe, dressed impeccably in a tailored suit even at this late hour. His expression carried both curiosity and condescension. I was just finishing up, sir," Daniel stammered, quickly trying to close his books. But the billionaire's eyes were sharp. He stepped into the room, glancing at the scattered pages. "Studying? At this hour? What for?" Daniel swallowed hard. His instinct told him to stay quiet, but something stronger pushed the words out. "I want to learn, sir. I want a chance at something more." For a moment, there was silence. Then a smirk tugged at the corner of Mr. Al-Rahman's mouth. "Something more? You're a cleaner's son. People like you don't climb ladders. They hold them for others." The words stung, but Daniel clenched his fists under the table. He didn't respond, though his silence spoke volumes. The millionaire chuckled and left with a dismissive wave. "Don't waste your nights on dreams, boy. They'll only make the mornings harder." But Daniel did not stop. Escalating tension. From then on, the relationship between them grew complicated. Mr. Al-Rahman found himself both irritated and intrigued by the boy's persistence. Every evening, despite exhaustion, Daniel returned to his books. Every morning, he showed up for work, his uniform neat, his chores complete. The millionaire began to test him. Subtle at first, leaving an expensive foreign newspaper out, written in Arabic, to see if Daniel could make sense of it. To his surprise, Daniel did. Then came documents in French, notes scribbled in Spanish. Daniel, quietly, humbly, read them. With fluency. "You speak these languages?" the billionaire asked one day, his tone half mocking, half impressed. Daniel nodded. "I study them, sir, in the evenings." The man laughed, shaking his head. 9 languages, books in the dark. And yet here you are, polishing my flaws." The remark was cruel, meant to remind Daniel of his place. But deep down, even the billionaire felt the flicker of admiration. The mockery still. Admiration turned to mockery when the millionaire invited wealthy associates to his home one weekend. Among them were investors from abroad, aristocrats, and business magnates. Daniel and his mother served quietly in the background, moving through the hall with trays of refreshments. At one point, the conversation turned to languages and international business. With a sly grin, Mr. Al-Rahman called Daniel forward. "Tell me, boy, how many languages do you claim to speak?" The room erupted in laughter at the absurdity of the question. A cleaner's son speaking multiple languages? Impossible. Daniel hesitated, the weight of humiliation pressing down, but he stood tall. 9, sir. The laughter grew louder. The guests exchanged mocking glances, and one even muttered, "A fantasy for the poor." But the test came moments later, when one of the guests, an Arab dignitary, jokingly addressed Daniel in Arabic. Without missing a beat, Daniel replied fluently. Gasps filled the room. Another switched to French, then Spanish, then Mandarin. Each time, Daniel responded smoothly, confidently. The laughter died, replaced by stunned silence. But for Mr. Al-Rahman, the moment was not one of pride. It was irritation, a sense of being upstaged in his own home. The jealousy from that day, the atmosphere shifted. The millionaire, who once dismissed Daniel, now seemed intent on proving the boy's abilities worthless. He gave him harder tasks, extended his hours, and criticized his work relentlessly. "You think knowing words makes you important?" he sneered one morning. "Books don't put food on the table. Hard work does. Don't forget that." Daniel nodded silently, but inside, his determination burned hotter. He refused to let cruelty break him. If anything, every insult was fuel. Every dismissal was proof he was on the right path. His mother noticed the change, too. "They see your light," she whispered one night, resting a hand on his shoulder. "And it scares them. Don't you dare dim it for anyone." Those words carried him through. The turning tide. It wasn't long before the tides began to turn. One afternoon, a crisis erupted during a high-stakes business meeting in the mansion. Important documents had arrived from an overseas partner, written entirely in a language none of the millionaire's advisors could decipher. Time was short, the deal was on the line, and frustration grew in the lavish boardroom. In the chaos, Daniel walked in quietly to collect empty glasses. His eyes fell on the papers. Without hesitation, he spoke. "Would you like me to translate, sir?" The room froze. Mr. Al-Rahman's eyes narrowed. "You? Translate this?" But desperation outweighed pride. He allowed it. And within minutes, Daniel had not only translated the documents, but clarified complex financial terminology that even the advisors struggled with. The guests were astonished. They praised the boy's brilliance, calling him a prodigy. For the first time, the millionaire felt the sting of being overshadowed, not by an equal, but by someone he considered beneath him. Rising conflict, the following weeks, only intensified the unspoken rivalry. Daniel's reputation quietly spread through whispers among the guests and staff. "The cleaner's boy who speaks 9 languages," they called him. Some praised his discipline, others laughed at the absurdity. But what mattered was this: he was no longer invisible. And visibility, in a world where power thrived on hierarchy, was dangerous. The more Daniel shone, the harsher Mr. Al-Rahman became. He scolded him in front of others, assigned him degrading tasks, and even threatened to fire him. But each attempt to humiliate Daniel backfired, for his grace and resilience only earned him more silent respect. At last, one evening, tension reached a boiling point. A new group of investors arrived, and once again, language became the barrier. Once again, Daniel was called forward to assist, and once again, he performed flawlessly. Only this time, something different happened. The investors, impressed beyond measure, asked why a boy of such intellect was polishing floors instead of working in academia or business. The question hung heavy in the air, exposing the injustice in the room. The guests turned to Mr. Al-Rahman, waiting for his response. His jaw tightened. His pride wavered. For the first time, he felt cornered, not by another millionaire, but by the very boy he had tried to keep small. And that was when the story's momentum shifted toward its climax. Daniel's brilliance could no longer be hidden in the shadows. The millionaire would either have to acknowledge the truth or risk being humiliated in front of the world. The air in the grand dining hall was thick with expectation. Crystal chandeliers glittered overhead, their brilliance reflecting off golden-rimmed glasses and polished marble floors. Around the long oak table sat men and women whose fortunes shaped the city, investors from Europe, oil magnates from the Middle East, tech giants from Asia. Each one was a figure of immense influence, and at the head of the table, as always, sat Mr. Al-Rahman, proud and unyielding. He thrived in these gatherings, where his wealth and dominance were displayed for all to admire. Yet tonight, his confidence was slipping. The discussion had shifted toward global expansion, contracts, and negotiations. Once again, language had become a problem. One investor spoke rapidly in Mandarin, another countered in French, while a European guest muttered legal terms in German. Translators were fumbling, misinterpreting key phrases. Confusion spread like wildfire. The deal, worth hundreds of millions, was on the brink of collapse, and then quietly a voice cut through the noise. "I can help." All eyes turned. At the far edge of the room, standing with a tray of empty glasses, was Daniel. His uniform was plain, his posture humble, but his voice carried confidence. A stunned silence followed. Then, with calm precision, Daniel stepped forward and began to translate. Mandarin flowed seamlessly into English, then French into Spanish, German into Arabic. His words were measured, flawless, leaving no room for doubt. The room gasped. Investors leaned forward, their skepticism melting into awe. Some clapped quietly, others exchanged glances of astonishment. "Remarkable," one whispered. "He speaks like a diplomat." Another nodded. "Not just fluency, understanding. He knows the subtleties, the nuances." In mere minutes, Daniel had salvaged what seasoned translators had failed to do. The deal was back on track. Negotiations resumed smoothly, and the investors erupted in praise. All the while, Mr. Al-Rahman sat frozen at the head of the table, his knuckles white as he gripped the armrest of his chair. This was his gathering, his stage, his domain, and yet the spotlight was no longer on him. It was on the cleaner's son, the breaking point. When the negotiations ended, the investors turned their attention not to the millionaire, but to Daniel, who, "Is this young man?" one of them asked. "Surely he is not just staff." "He's wasted here," another added. "With intellect like that, he could work for embassies, corporations, universities." Compliments piled higher, each one cutting deeper into Mr. Al-Rahman's pride. His jaw clenched, his smile faltered. The humiliation was unbearable. His carefully curated world, where wealth equaled superiority, was unraveling before his guests. In desperation, he stood, forcing laughter. Yes, amusing, isn't it? My cleaner's boy thinks himself a scholar. 9 languages, he claims. But remember, gentlemen, parlor tricks don't make a man. He is still what he has always been, a servant. The words were sharp, dripping with venom. The laughter he expected did not come. Instead, the investors stared at him in silence, their expressions hard. Finally, one spoke. "A servant, you say?" "I see no servant. I see a mind sharper than most. Executives I've met," another added, "and I see a man of humility, intelligence, and perseverance, qualities wealth cannot buy." The sting of those words was worse than any insult. For the first time in his empire of riches, Mr. Al-Rahman was being diminished, not by equals, but by those who admired a boy he had sought to belittle. The public humiliation, but the true humiliation, was yet to come. One of the dignitaries, an Arab prince, leaned back in his chair, eyes narrowed with curiosity. "Tell me, Daniel, how does a cleaner's son come to master 9 languages? What drives a young man to such lengths?" The room leaned in, hungry for his answer. Daniel hesitated, then lifted his gaze, his voice steady. "Because my mother taught me that dignity is not given. It's earned. She cleans these halls with pride, and I studied in the dark, because I wanted to honor her sacrifices. I learned, because knowledge is freedom, and no amount of wealth can chain a mind that refuses to be small." The room fell silent. Then applause thundered, echoing through the chamber. Guests stood, clapping, nodding, some with tears in their eyes. But all eyes flickered to Mr. Al-Rahman, and in that moment, the power dynamic shifted completely. The billionaire, once towering and untouchable, now sat diminished, his pride shattered in the presence of a boy he had mocked. The laughter he once enjoyed now belonged to others, but this time it was not directed at Daniel. It was at him, the eye. Final blow, as the applause died down, one of the investors turned to Mr. Al-Rahman. "You should be proud, old friend. This young man is a jewel in your household." The words were meant as praise, but they cut like a blade. For how could he be proud when every word, every revelation stripped away his superiority? His empire was still intact, his wealth untouched. But his authority, the respect he commanded, was in pieces on the floor. The climax reached its peak when the prince stood, gesturing to Daniel. "I would like to sponsor his education. A mind like his belongs in halls of learning, not scrubbing floors." "What do you say?" All eyes turned once more to the billionaire. his face flushed crimson, his lips pressed into a tight line. Pride warred with reality, ego with inevitability. At last, with a forced smile, he muttered, "Do as you wish." The room erupted again, this time not in laughter, but in celebration. And for the first time in his life, Mr. Al-Rahman, the untouchable millionaire, had been silenced. Why, this was the true climax. This was not just about a boy proving himself. It was about hierarchy collapsing before an audience of power. It was about humiliation so complete that the mighty were forced to bow, if not in posture, then in silence. The boy who once studied in the dark had outshone the man who lived in chandeliers, and the world had witnessed it.